Hello everyone and welcome back to the program. When the United Kingdom joined the European community in 1973, many people celebrated, but not Herbert W. Armstrong. In the March 1973 Plain Truth, he delivered a sobering warning. He wrote, "Britain is going to look back on Monday, January 1st, 1973, in all probability, as a most tragically historic date, a date fraught with ominous potentialities. For that date marked the United Kingdom's entry into the European community." He wrote that in 1973. Today, Mr. Armstrong's ominous potentialities are menacing realities. Britain's membership in the European Union and its 2016 vote to leave has been harmful and divisive. Today, Brexit is causing political chaos and division, financial and economic uncertainty, and growing social discord. As the Brexit crisis deepens, Mr. Armstrong's 45-year-old prophecy grows more remarkable. January 1st, 1973 was a most tragically historic date.
The Trumpet Daily.
Just think about what Herbert Armstrong wrote way back in 1973. He said that Britain's entry into the European community, it portends a tragic situation, and today we're witnessing that tragedy unfold right before our eyes. Britain will be faced with a dilemma, he wrote, and that dilemma would revolve around the role of a fundamentally Protestant Britain in a Catholic-dominated, imperialistic United States of Europe. That's what's now forming. Britain will face a choice, Mr. Armstrong said. Abandon its own historical roots, or else abandon Europe. And once again, today, we are witnessing that dilemma unfold. In that March 1973 Plain Truth article, Mr. Armstrong gave another sobering warning. He said Britain would leave the European Union, and then he also prophesied of this political union of 10 nations in Europe, that it would rise, the seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. Mr. Armstrong first warned about Germany's end-time dominance and the final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, even before World War II. For many, many years, 50 years, he warned that a German-led, Catholic-inspired European superpower would inflict terrible destruction on this earth. And all of that, of course, would precede the second coming of Jesus Christ. This forecast was Herbert Armstrong's keynote prophecy.
In a union of a United States of Europe, in a united empire.
And it's being clearly and powerfully fulfilled today. We've talked about this signature prophecy many times before on this program. And now these prophecies are being fulfilled. We're watching them happen. How did Mr. Armstrong know, even as Britain entered the European Union in 1973, how did he know that that relationship would end in a bitter divorce? And how did he know that Germany would reunite and lead a federal European superpower? Well, he knew because of Bible prophecy. We're living in a nation, we're living in a world that's besieged by crises and uncertainty. Now more than ever, we need an understanding of Bible prophecy. We need the hope of the true gospel message. And Mr. Armstrong delivered that message. He delivered that hope. He did. For, as I say, more than 50 years. We'll begin our study today in the book of Hosea. Go and get your Bible and read along with me. We're going to offer you this free booklet, this Hosea booklet, Reaping the Whirlwind. I don't know if we've offered this recently, but we've got this and quite a bit more today. The United States and Britain in Prophecy. We have offered this a few times before, but this went out to 6 million people during the 20th century. A wildly popular book. The most popular book Mr. Armstrong ever produced. If you want to know what is prophesied for Britain, then make sure that you request the United States and Britain in prophecy. And at the same time, you'll see from this beautiful booklet, he was right that, he was. Mr. Armstrong was right about the now forming European Union, or that seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. And he was right about the divorce, Britain's divorce from Europe. even though that's ongoing, but still, look at the trouble that it's causing. Hosea chapter 2. The book of Hosea was written in 790 BC or thereabouts, just before, a few years before, I guess a few decades before Israel went into captivity. But this message is for the end time. There's duality in these prophecies, like so many others. It wasn't just for Hosea's day. This isn't just ancient history. This was a prophet, a minor prophet, one of many prophets in the Old Testament, the prophets of old. And Paul said in Ephesians that the church is built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. And so it's important for you to know and to understand what these prophets taught. Hosea chapter 2, we'll start in verse 8. It says, "For she did not know that I gave her corn and wine and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal." We're breaking into the middle of this passage here, but God is saying, look, all this power, this wealth, the silver, the gold, the corn, and the wine, I gave you that. I gave you those blessings. That's what God says to our nations. That's what he's saying to Britain. That's what he's saying to the United States. And when you think back to Great Britain, when it truly was great, the greatest empire this world has ever seen, William Manchester called it, well, Britain in the 1800s, he called it the workshop of the world. This was where the Industrial Revolution was centered, right here in this little island. And look at the power and the influence that went right around the world. During the 1800s, during the early 1900s, this is a quote from Manchester's book. He said, under Victoria, one regiment or another had been in action every year, somewhere on 5 continents, fighting from Aden in Afghanistan to Zululand to the Zor Valley. They were almost always victorious. One reason was their sublime, unfathomable courage. An astonishing number actually enjoyed courting death. Now that's a different time period. The 1800s, the late 1800s, the courage of the British as they went out and civilized so many areas of this world, so many regions, so many nations. They certainly did. That's true history. I know that's being revised today by so many, but still, this is from another book, Churchill and Empire by Lawrence James. It says in 1900, the red bits on the world map added up to 1.8 million square miles, which were home to 294 million people. There were over 13 million British colonists, most of whom were first or second generation immigrants who had settled in Canada, Newfoundland, Natal, Cape Colony, Australia, and New Zealand. What an empire. The sun never set on that empire. And as Hosea 2 brings out here, God had something to do with that. We might like to take credit for it, but God had something to do with that. And you can go into the first book of the Bible, and this is brought out in the United States and Britain in prophecy, and read about the promises that God made to Abraham, and then again to his son Isaac, and then to Jacob, and then the name change. He changed Jacob's name to Israel, and then Israel's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. I mean, just incredible history. It's all laid out for us in the United States and Britain in prophecy. If you want to know what is prophesied for Britain, even in these days where we see a lot of division and strife and turmoil in government, make sure that you request these free booklets today, the U.S. and Britain in prophecy, and then also Hosea, reaping the whirlwind, carrying on in Hosea 2. It says here in verse 9, "Therefore will I return and take away my corn in the time thereof, and my wine in the season thereof, and will recover my wool and my flax given to cover her nakedness. And now will I discover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of my hand." See, we've placed our trust, not in God, but we've placed our trust in other nations, even nations that have traditionally been our enemies, our lovers. We place great faith in alliances with other nations, but we've lost sight of God. We've lost touch with God. I'll give you a quote about that in just a moment. Look at Hosea 2, though, Hosea 4. This is the first couple of verses here. Hosea 4, verse 1. It says, hear the word of the Eternal, you children of Israel, for the Eternal has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there's no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. He said there's no knowledge, no truth. It says by swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, it says, and blood touches blood. It's very different. I mean, I just read to you that empire spirit in the 1800s, and what a difference. What a difference when you compare that era to today. But then also, what a difference when you compare the morals or lack thereof. This is from Manchester's book here. It says, the solid core of agreed religious belief was gone. He's commenting about the end of the Victorian age when she died in 1901, and then we went into the Edwardian age, the first decade of the 20th century, and then these are the changes that were happening right there at the start of the 20th century. He says the solid core of agreed religious belief was gone. The Bible had lost its grip on Englishmen. Is that significant? Would that impact the nations? The Bible lost its grip. It says people were groping for a substitute. The new vogues were popular psychology, pragmatism, and Nietzscheanism. He continues, Edwardians were bombarded by news of discoveries. I mean, it was a very modern time. So far as they knew, all these new discoveries, glands, hormones, vitamins, genes, Einstein's E equals MC squared, Pavlovian conditioned reflexes, and the subconscious as revealed by Freud, Adler, and Jung, fruits of inventive genius promised more excitement to come. And then finally he says, but the cumulative effect of all this change, which should have broadened the human vision, gave men a sense of confinement and helplessness. The cumulative effect, all this technology, all of this advancement, you think it would just broaden our thinking. You think it would just stretch out our horizons, open up new opportunities. And in one sense it did with the technology advancements. But we turned inward, as he says there. I mean, it led to a sense of confinement and helplessness. Great changes, earth-shaking changes in the social fabric of our society. Well, God says, look at Hosea 4 here in verse 6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you. That you shall be no priest to me, seeing you have forgotten the law of God. I will also forget your children. That's what God says about our time today. As I said, this book is for us. He's talking about a time when we would lack knowledge. Well, today we're living in the midst of a knowledge explosion. But look at the ignorance when it comes to the Bible. Look at the flat-out rejection of the Holy Bible, this book that people sacrificed their lives for in times past. This book that probably every family in Britain has a copy of, but no one reads it. No one studies it. The Bible, just like that quote I gave to you, the Bible has lost its grip on Englishmen. That's true. And that's changed us through and through. We've got all of this knowledge, as Mr. Armstrong said in another article back in the 1970s, and yet all of these problems to go with it, all of this division, the breakdown of the family, so little happiness and joy. It's because of this. We're dying of thirst. It's like we're in an ocean, and yet we're dying of thirst. That's what Mr. Armstrong said. We've forgotten God's law. And it says it here in Hosea 4, verse 7. It says, as they were increased, so they sinned against me. Therefore will I change their glory into shame. As they were increased, as the knowledge explosion just continued, knowing no bounds, as they increased, so they sinned against me. That's the great paradox of our day. All of this technological advancement, all of this modern technology, and all of this sin, our sins are multiplying. Look at verse 17, a little further down. Ephraim, biblical Ephraim is modern day Britain. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone, it says. Their drink is sour. They have committed whoredom continually. Her rulers with shame do love. I'll give you a quote here from this booklet by my father, Hosea, Reaping the Whirlwind. This is from the little booklet, today's spiritual condition in Britain is at an all-time low. God says the people are bonded to their idols. Britain is totally ensnared with the pleasure of this world. I mean, who can deny that? Who can deny that? There's still a lot of wealth and prosperity. There's still a lot of materialism. But look, there's lots and lots of trouble. And if you don't see that on the horizon, your eyes are not opened. Jesus said to watch and to pray. Pray always. We better open our eyes so that we can see what's coming. Chapter 5 in Hosea, here's verse 11. It says, Ephraim is oppressed and broken in judgment because he willingly walked after the commandment. And then verse 12, therefore will I be unto Ephraim as a moth, and to the house of Judah as rottenness. See, he compares us to a moth-eaten garment that might look good on the outside. Here's what my father had to say. People only see prosperity, glitter, and glamour. Most people today are only living for the next exciting entertainment. Even though the signs of disaster are there, our nations are refusing to see the moths and the worms in our society. There is not much substance left to hold our nations together because of our many sins. And it's not just Britain. I mean, it's the United States too. Look at these nations. Look at the trouble that we see in government. Look at the debt-laden figures of our federal debt in the U.S. Look at the troubles around the world that we're trying to solve but can't. Look at the division between nations. Look at the hatred, the violence, so much suffering, so much unhappiness. Why? What's prophesied? What's prophesied for us in the road ahead? For Britain, for the United States? Well, for much more on that, as I say, make sure that you request these free booklets, Hosea, Reaping the Whirlwind, and then the United States and Britain in Prophecy. And also, he was right. I'll just draw your attention, too, to the latest Trumpet magazine. This is our newest copy, the Trumpet magazine edition. We also, of course, have much of this material on our website, thetrumpet.com. But if you haven't subscribed to the Trumpet yet, make sure that you become a subscriber. There's no cost or obligation, no follow-up if you don't want it. If you don't want to re-up your subscription, you don't have to. But if you do, that too is free. We have nothing to ask for as far as money is concerned. We just want to give you this material and hope that you'll study it, hope that you'll dig into it, because there are answers there to life's most pressing questions. We're getting out as much as we can. With public Bible lectures as well, and we do invite our Trumpet subscribers to upcoming lectures that we're going to be having in Belfast in January, and then after that at Glasgow, perhaps sometime in March of next year. So as I say, if you haven't subscribed, make sure that you do that today. We'll be right back.
The Trumpet Daily.
And by the end of World War I, the United States and Great Britain owned and possessed more than 2/3 and almost 3/4 of all the great wealth, the cultivated wealth of all the world. And all the other nations, Russia with her billion people, I mean China with her billion, and India with nearly a billion, more than 3/4 of a billion people. And Russia, the third largest nation in the world, and Japan and Indonesia and others that are that have vast populations, and all the nations of Europe, Germany and France, Spain, Portugal, Italy. All of the nations combined had only a little over 1/4 and less than a third of the wealth of the world, and our two nations possessed it. We had the sea gates of the whole world, and we're losing them. And Britain has already lost her world empire.
That was Herbert Armstrong, one of his old radio programs where he talked about World War I and World War II and the British Empire. Mr. Armstrong had so much to say about Britain and the loss of its empire, it being reduced to a second-rate power. I mean, it's right there in that most popular book that he wrote, the U.S. and Britain in Prophecy. This was first printed back in the 1930s, and as I say, it's gone out to 6 million homes around the world. In this book, he explains the greatest empire this world has ever seen, why it was great, and what's happened to it since. since the first two wars of the 20th century, 2 world wars where Britain's strength was decimated, its manpower reduced. It lost so much of its commonwealth. And as I say, look at what it's been reduced to today. Even though there's still prosperity to some degree, we see so much immorality. We've seen Britain become a very secular nation. There were several Plain Truth articles from back in the 1960s and 70s that talked about so many woes facing Britain at that time. The economic problems, the low food production, struggles with defining its commonwealth, the racial tension, a burgeoning and unsustainable welfare system, notorious laziness, preoccupation with immoral entertainment, all of that. Mr. Armstrong talked about it. The Plain Truth addressed those things, and you could see why we've had those struggles, those problems, those difficulties. If you dig into the U.S. and Britain in Prophecy, if you haven't gotten a copy of this book, make sure that you get one today. This is a quote going back to 1956. Notice this: the stage is all set. The Germans are coming back from the destruction of World War II in breathtaking manner. Germany is the economic and military heart of Europe. But probably Germany will lead and dominate the coming United States of Europe, but Britain will be no part of it. So he prophesied there of the divorce. Britain's not going to be a part of it. Germany's going to rise again to be that dominant power in Europe. As I say, we've talked about this over and over again. Let's read from Deuteronomy this time in the Pentateuch, Deuteronomy 8 and verse 7. It says, "For the eternal your God brings you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills." God goes on in the next several verses to describe the fabulous wealth that came upon our peoples. But we forgot about him, like Abraham Lincoln said in the case of the United States. We found ourselves in the midst of all of these blessings, this abundance, but we've forgotten God. Carrying on in verse 11, it says, "Beware that you forget not the eternal your God in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command you this day." Well, he goes on to talk about, he gives a warning. Beware. Beware. Don't forget these commandments. And you can do that. You tend to do that humanly. Human nature tends to do that when you come upon good times. All of these blessings, all of this wealth, all of the abundance of food, and then we forget God. Look over at what it says in Jeremiah chapter 30. Just a couple more verses here before we conclude. Jeremiah 30 and verse 3. We'll have to hurry along here. It says, "For lo, the days come, says the Eternal, that I will bring again the captivity of my people, Israel and Judah, says the Eternal, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it." It's addressed here to Israel and Judah. Now, Israel had gone into captivity something like 100 years before this. And so what's he talking about? Well, it says it right there in the verse. Behold, behold, I will bring again the captivity. So there was the captivity anciently, but then God said to his prophet, there's another one coming. This is Jeremiah 30. Read it for yourself. Another captivity. That's what we want to be concerned about. That's what God is warning this world, particularly our nations. That's what he's warning about in these last days. Verse 5, it says, "For thus says the Eternal, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask you now, and see whether a man does travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins, as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness." That's what's coming. And then verse 7, a memory verse here, it says, "Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It's even the time of Jacob's trouble." Jacob, the father of Joseph. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. And his name was put upon those lads, his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And those two are Israel today. And Mr. Armstrong will walk you right through it, all the scriptures, to show you who we are, where we came from, where Ephraim and Manasseh are today in our modern world. Do you really think that God would just ignore the greatest empire in the history of the world and the greatest single superpower in the history of the world? Do you really think in all of these prophecies, a third of the Bible is prophecy, do you think in all of that, while there might be a mention of this little nation, Ethiopia for instance, or whatever nation you might pick, but not the United States and not Great Britain? A lot of people in the traditional Christian world believe that. We are mentioned in the Bible, and that's why you need these booklets. There's so much more that I could get into. I just don't have enough time. But make sure you get the booklets, call our operators now, get the free material, and don't forget to subscribe to the Trumpet magazine so that you too can receive an invitation down the road to hopefully turn up at one of our public Bible lectures. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.